I'm JP Tuesday.
And I'm Kiki Cannon. As lifelong Disney fans, the work of countless talented Disney creatives have shaped our lives.
Now, as the Disney catalog expands, we're taking a journey through film and television to discover if that spark that shaped us as children lives on in adulthood.
Does your favorite Disney media still cast that same spell? Join us as we find out. We are Rewatching the Magic.
Dark greetings, Kiki.
Good evening.
We are starting spooky season, and we are starting it with a bang with What We Do in the Shadows. This is our first FX series I think we're doing for the show.
Yeah.
This now opens the floodgates, and people are going to ask us to do Archer. I just know it.
Yeah, I had mentioned that it wasn't until D23 this year that I had thought about it. Shout out to our good friend Lindsay, Lindsay
Carosa, from Solar Opposites, who got her own panel. We forgot to mention that.
Yeah, and when she was posting her pictures from her time at D23, she posed next to the Solar Opposites poster, and next to it was a poster of What We Do in the Shadows, and I went, oh man, of course, that's on FX, which is now owned by Disney.
And
so
now a cornerstone of Hulu too.
Yeah, it's also a cornerstone of Hulu, as it airs there the next day. Yeah, it didn't even occur to me that, of course, FX is now part of the Disney staple.
And the only thing they didn't buy was Fox News and Fox Sports, so everything else is now in.
Yeah, those are actually separate companies. A lot of people don't know, but yeah. That was really cool because I do love this series. It is in that same vein. I mean, we've mentioned it before a few times when we've talked about both Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi in their work with other Disney things. The original film that this is based on was possibly the first thing I ever saw Taika do as far as an actor. I think I had seen his name maybe because of his work on the Flight of the Conchords TV series. Jermaine, I had known from his work with Flight of the Conchords. We've mentioned that before. But they had done the film as an independent New Zealand film back in 2014. It was kind of slightly more difficult for me to find at the time, so I had to go hunt it down when I heard about it as a thing that they had done together in New Zealand. It was like, well, Jermaine had done this weird mockumentary film about vampires with his friend Taika, and I thought, well, okay, I'll go see what that's about. And it took me a while to hunt it down because it wasn't super well distributed over here, but it was one of those things that if you're in the right sort of fandom, you started to hear about. And both the horror fandom and the comedy fandom had started talking about this film. Eventually I found it, and watching that original film, which unfortunately is not owned by Disney, or we'd just be talking about that right now, it was so funny. Of this idea of a documentary crew that follows these vampires who live in Wellington in an apartment together and try to pretend they're not vampires and are just really bad at it. And then years later, I heard that after Taika got the big successes that he did with Ragnarok and with Jojo Rabbit, and after Jermaine got his bigger successes, especially after like Moana and stuff, people were really into turning that idea into a series. In 2019, bringing this idea into the American market, and it's the exact same idea in theory as the film. It's a group of vampires who live in a house together, and they're having a documentary made about their life, except it's a little more like The Office, I guess.
Obviously a completely different set of characters.
Yeah.
And this one's set in New York as opposed to New Zealand.
Oh, yeah, well, we're on Staten Island, yeah. So we're on Staten Island, and we're following 4 vampires in this one. That 3 of them are immigrants from Europe.
And traditional vampires.
And then one of them is a new type of vampire that was not present in the original movie. Watching it as a fan of the original movie, that was the one that I was like, this is the most brilliant addition to this series.
The energy vampire.
Yeah, the energy vampire, Colin Robinson.
That's a unique concept, though. A vampire that doesn't get suck blood, but suck emotion.
Well, it's not an idea unique to the series, because it's one of those things that is just sort of out there in the world.
I mean, and I've said this when we talked about it last week. I've never seen the original film, and this is the first time of me watching the series. So yeah. The concept of an energy vampire, someone who is, we've heard the term before, but it's mostly referring to someone who just annoys the hell out of you. But this thing that's his literal reason for existence, is he will annoy people and feed off their emotions.
Yeah, and the idea of taking that generic term and making it extremely literal in the series was such a stroke of genius.
And of course, making him a daywalker.
Yeah. The cool thing about it, though, is that I love that it is the traditional kind of what we've talked about with Taika Waititi's work in general, and this carries over from the film, which is all that stuff you think would be really cool is actually kind of weird and mundane and kind of goofy and also extremely bisexual.
I mean, this is the guy that gave us the gay vampires, the gay pirates, gay Norse gods.
Which, in fairness to him, all of those things are originally very gay. He's just kind of reminding us of that. I mean, just like, if you go back and look at all the origination of all these things, it's like, oh yeah, that's just, But he's just kind of reminding us that if all these things existed in the real world, well, I mean, pirates do exist, but if the kind of mythological versions of the things existed, like it would just kind of be boring and mundane. And that idea with vampires is just so very funny.
And it's also, the vampires adjusting to modern life, like modern technology, modern dress.
Which, to be fair, 3 of them don't, which is one of the funnier jokes from the original film. Is there is a prolonged scene of the vampires trying to go out for a night on the town in the original movie, and Taika and Jermaine's characters trying to dress up for the evening, but the problem is that they don't go shopping. They just get their clothing from their victims, and so their clothing is just hundreds of years of random bits of clothing that also has bloodstains on it in various places, that they're just kind of mixing and matching various bits of fashion from random centuries and decades, and trying to put together what they think will look cool, and none of it matches the modern era, and then they go out, try to go clubbing, thinking that they look cool and fashionable and modern, and it is as hilarious as you think it would be. And also bloodstained, because it's clothing from their victims. They do better with it in the TV series, but it is the idea of vampires think whatever the clothing of their century looked cool, because they are the ultimate old person who is still stuck in their decade,
The ultimate boomers.
Well, it is, but it's not just, not to just pick on any one generation. It happens to everyone as they age, What you think is cool kind of just does freeze in time. And so you see it with each of the vampires that, Nandor does have this kind of medieval conqueror kind of vibe to his look, and Nadja is a bit more progressive in her dress, but she still does have all this kind of petticoats and lace and all that kind of stuff. And then the youngest of the 3 traditional vampires there with Laszlo, he does have his 300-year-old British sensibility about him.
His fashion is the one most likely to come back, honestly.
Yeah, but he still, immediately it's kind of like, well, 300-year-old British fop kind of, thing to him. But it is really funny of all of them that they have. Interestingly, Colin Robinson is the one that has kept up with the times the most, even though he's like 100 years old. He is sort of boring modern office dress.
Because he works at a boring modern office. He's the only one of them that actually interacts with the outside world on a daily basis.
Yeah, so even though he's not fashionable, he is at least modern in his dress. And not the dress from, 50 or 60 years ago, but just the most boring version of current fashion.
Which plays into his powers.
Yeah. So it really is kind of funny there, but it is really fascinating the way that they've taken the original conceit of the film, which was that this one group of vampires had given a documentary crew permission to make a film about them. And now it's just kind of an ongoing series. And they do make constant reference to the fact of, well, we're just constantly being followed around by a documentary crew. And it's weird to other vampires they meet, but everybody just kind of goes like, yeah, okay, you've got a reality series being made about you. We get it, you know.
And this is right in the, like you said, The Office, Parks and Rec, Modern Family,
yeah,
The Muppets.
Yeah, the ABC Muppets TV series, yeah. It is such a good idea that they hit on right at the right time, and everybody involved just kind of does so well. In the first season, Jermaine and Taika were very involved in writing and directing that first season. And then as it went on, they were a little less involved, especially Taika. Jermaine still does a lot of directing, and sometimes he'll still write an episode, but they're more just kind of in the executive producer kind of roles.
I mean, Taika's kind of got his hands full these days with other projects.
Yeah, but I mean, and both of them do, because Jermaine's moved on to other stuff as well. But he'll still come back. He would still come back and direct an episode in like the second season. But I don't think either of them came back and did any writing or directing for the last season.
The series really got a lot of popularity, really at the early pandemic. Because people were inside, they just were, they had nothing to do and nowhere to go. And, this thing just exploded as people were watching this on Hulu.
Yeah, and it's a really good binge watch because there's, it's about 30 minutes an episode and, about 10 episodes a season. So you can rush through it pretty quickly. It's also a really good, coherent story. It had been a while since I had seen the early episodes, like the season 1 stuff, for the rewatch, and going back and watching some of the stuff that's even mentioned in the pilot and going, oh man, that is still coming back in like season 4. Like some of that stuff is still a going concern even in the most recent episode. So if you're looking for something that's really hilarious but also really into its own lore, this is a show for you, because it will not forget a single throwaway line.
Kind of reminds me of the Orville in that way.
It's a little bit like that, yeah, but also it really gives the actors a lot of control. A lot of this stuff is apparently ad-libbed, like they will have a basic structure, but a lot of the individual lines are ad-libbed, especially with Matt Berry's stuff as Laszlo, because he is very well known for his ad-libbing on his previous series.
And we had talked how Taika tends to let his actors kind of wing it when the time calls for it.
Yeah, so that started very early on because the pilot was written by Jermaine and directed by Taika. So the very first episode was kind of that team. The actors that they got were well known in their previous careers for being able to just do that, and they have been given a lot of leeway to guide where their characters go. And sometimes when the writing staff really likes what the actors come up with, it becomes a major core part of the character and will become a massive plot line sometimes a couple of seasons later. And you will sometimes hear the actors go, I was really surprised to see that come up in a script, in season 3, because that was legitimately just a random thing I said off the cuff in an ad lib that I never even expected to make it into the episode, much less become a massive plot line later on. That is pretty hilarious to me. Some of the stuff that becomes really important to this series that was never even intended to make it into the episode. While we're talking about that, do you want to get into our cast itself?
Yeah. Let's get into our cast. Let's start with our. I guess you say the main character, Nandor. At least as far as the episodes that I've seen go so far.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure that you can really call any of the group in the house the main character, because it really does kind of give them equal time throughout the series. But yeah, Nandor is the oldest of the group, and the only one of the main cast we've actually talked about before, because he's the only one of the actors that has actually shown up in something else that we've talked about before. But yeah, Nandor the Relentless is played by Kevin Novak. He was probably best known over in England for a series called Phonejacker, which I have not seen, but I think the best that I can kind of explain it to an American audience is, if you remember the Comedy Central series Crank Yankers. It just really seemed to be that he would call up people and do prank calls using different voices. He is an incredible impressionist. In fact, the voice he uses for Nandor, he said, started out as one of his Phonejacker voices. And he just kind of expanded it a little bit. He also was in a British film that I had heard of before. I had never heard of Phonejacker until after I had looked into him for What We Do in the Shadows. But I had heard of the film Four Lions, which was sort of like a satire film about dealing with the idea of terrorism and stuff in the UK. So it really made a big splash when it came out, and so I remember the conversation about that film when it came out. He came up on the show before because he played Roger Dearly in the film Cruella. So that's where we've talked about him before on the show. He is so absolutely hilarious as Nandor. I have fallen in love with his portrayal. The one that kind of got me when they were like, oh, they're doing a What We Do in the Shadows series, and I was like, are they bringing back any of the original cast? They were like, no, but they have Matt Berry. And I was like, okay, I'm immediately sold on this series. Because I have been a fan of Matt Berry's for a while now. Matt Berry has had several series over in England that people might know of. Probably a lot of people would know him from the IT Crowd. I knew him first from Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, which is one of those things that if you ever come up to me and be like, I'm a big fan of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, that's one of those things that's like, okay, we can be friends now. Because you are exactly on my level of humor. Because that is one of those shows that you either immediately get the humor of that show, or it is going to absolutely baffle you. There is no middle ground. There is no, you watch it and you occasionally laugh or what. It is either the funniest thing you have ever seen, or it is the most baffling thing you have ever seen. It's one or the other. It's absolutely full on hilarious, or it is just the worst thing you have ever seen in your life. But he was on, he did one called The Toast of London that was hilarious. He was on The Mighty Boosh. I mean, just, the guy is incredible. But every time he pops up on something, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be my new favorite thing now. I'm stopping everything because Matt Berry's doing a new thing. So he was the thing that originally sold me on the show more than just they're doing a TV series of What We Do in the Shadows. It's like that and Matt Berry. I was like, okay, sold. His thing of Laszlo, every single week that an episode airs, Matt Berry will trend on Twitter. And it's just because of how he says a particular word each week. Like one week it was just for how he said the word camera. Shut up, we're doing a piece to camera. Everybody found it so funny that Twitter that week just shared that like one line.
Or the way he pronounces Manhattan.
Yeah. And it's become a running gag that every single new episode of What We Do in the Shadows just has like what word Matt Berry pronounces weird that particular week is the trending thing on Twitter that week. The other of the old world vampires is Laszlo's wife, Nadja, who is played by Nastasia Dimitriou, but she is the one that I kind of was like, okay, I've never seen her in anything, but let's figure out where she came from because she is amazing. I really am one of those ones that just I don't know why, but I have not particularly run across her in anything else except she will occasionally show up on panel shows that I watch sometimes, like 8 out of 10 Cats or whatever. She was the host of something called The Big Flower Fight, which is kind of like Great British Bake Off, except for flower arranging.
Okay.
It is exactly what it sounds like. So, but she is wonderful and adorable and hilarious, and I enjoy her when she shows up. I just kind of wish she was in more things that I see.
She's apparently in the Cuphead show for Netflix.
Yeah, which I haven't gotten to see yet. I need to. It's on my like watch list, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And then the fourth of our vampires, Colin Robinson, is played by Mark Pruch. He is in a lot of different stuff, including The Office. He's on Better Call Saul. If you're an Adult Swim fan, he shows up in Dream Corp LLC. Like I said, he is the one that was kind of the surprise to everybody who knew the original film, because you were not expecting Colin Robinson. The pilot even sets it up as in, here's our 3 vampires, and then all of a sudden Colin Robinson just walks in later on in the episode. And it was like, oh, here's the twist. and he is just so excellent in the role. And immediately kind of became everybody's favorite vampire character, I think. Just from the idea that it was so bizarre. But I think out of the main cast, I think it's... I don't think I'm going to ruffle anybody's feathers when I say that everybody's favorite character in the main cast is Guillermo de la Cruz, the only human in the cast. Nandor's familiar, played by Harvey Guillen. This was the one that was like kind of took everybody by surprise, because you don't really expect the familiar to be everybody's favorite character.
I think it's because his story, and
yeah, I mean we'll get into it, yeah. But his story is kind of compelling to a lot of the sort of people who would watch this show, you know.
And I think it's anyone who's been in a position of, I got this position to move up and I'm never going to move up. And I think that a lot of people would resonate with, would sympathize with Guillermo because they're in the same position in real life, whether it's at their job or whatever, you know?
Yeah. But Harvey, if you knew him prior to his role as Guillermo, you might have seen him playing Benedict on The Magicians, or in the movie The Internship with Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn. But he also just recently is playing Nightwing over on the Harley Quinn TV series. So doing that voice over there. So that is kind of our main cast. We're gonna bring up some of the major cameos as we go through the plot here. Just fair warning, definitely spoilers for everything in season 1. We may mention some things that happen all the way up through season 4, though, so be warned. Be warned. We will be just talking about the show in general, so if you're intrigued by the concept and you're like, oh my god, it doesn't take that long to binge it, stop the episode here, come back to us in a week when you're caught up. We can wait. I'd rather you enjoy the twists and turns of the show. But if you're a fan of the show and want to hear our stuff, go ahead. We'll try to keep it to season 1 as much as possible, but can't guarantee something might not slip out from later on in the series. So be warned. You're the one that had your first kind of introduction to the show here. So I wanna get your thoughts on what your first opinion of it was as you were watching this pilot.
Very interesting. It's a nice start with Nandor. They're trying to have the big grand entrance, and then the coffin is just stuck. All right, that tells you everything. This is going to tell you the mood of this series, and I like that.
Yeah, with Guillermo trying to set the tone for the documentary crew of like, come into our spooky house with the spooky vampires, and then Nandor being like, the coffin lid is stuck. Get the butter knife, and then Guillermo is so desperately trying to be like, yes, master, very, very scary. You're very imposing. Good job.
And we mentioned it. Let's talk about Guillermo's story, because he seems to be the one that has the most interesting one, in that we see him as a child that he was intrigued by the movie Interview with the Vampire. More specifically, Antonio Banderas' character.
Yeah, Armand, yeah.
Because it was the first time he'd ever seen a Latino vampire. And that started his love of vampires and his want to be a vampire. And that is why he is with Nandor, because Nandor, as a familiar, he will eventually become a vampire, which itself becomes a running gag in the series as he meets other familiars of varying ages who each say, "Oh yeah, my master will turn me into a vampire any day now."
And a lot of them are, some of them are in their 70s, and they're like, yeah, I've been serving my master for 50 years now. Next year, I'm going to be a vampire,
Even Nandor will say, "Hey, you messed up today. That's one more year of service before I make you a vampire."
Yeah. Well, by the time we meet Guillermo, he has been serving Nandor for 10 years. And Guillermo is, in his 20s, maybe early 30s. It's kind of hard to...
I would say early 30s because he mentions having a job at Panera Bread prior to being a familiar.
Yeah, and I think at one point they say he was born in the early 90s. So, yeah. It originally starts out for Guillermo that all he wants is just to do his job and do it well, which he does. We see multiple times that Guillermo goes over and above.
Especially with the disposing of the bodies after the other vampires feed.
Yeah, he even says at the beginning that he's not a murderer, he just finds people who are easy to murder. Which is such a great line. But you see how he's really given up his kind of morality and his family and everything to be a familiar in hopes that he will be a vampire.
And at least as his first season moves on, his morale lowers as he sees the other familiars and their varying ages, and especially how they're treated by other vampires. And he himself even says he's less Armand and more Renfield, and it's getting to him.
And also he sees at several points during the season how disposable familiars are.
I mean, Laszlo and Nadja go through quite a few familiars throughout the course of the first season alone.
Yeah. And, just minor spoiler, after the first season, they never get another familiar.
I mean, after your first familiar is eaten by the Baron and your other familiar is killed because you have a cursed hat, maybe you want to hold off on getting any more familiar.
It's not even that. It's just that Guillermo is a really competent familiar, and he just becomes the familiar for the house. And they start putting more and more on him. It's less that they do, because, the old world vampires have been around for hundreds of years. So that was not their first familiar. Because familiars are just human. They get old and they die. There is nothing magical or special about the typical familiar. So vampires are used to getting, you see throughout the series, the vampires are just used to, like, there's that familiar, you get another familiar,
Literally treating them like pets.
Yeah. And so, or worse than that, because most humans actually give a crap about their pets.
We do see that Nandor seems to care about Guillermo. In moments.
I will just tell you that a large majority, let's say, of the fandom are Nandor Guillermo shippers.
Sure, I can see it.
It becomes more apparent as the series goes on.
But speaking only as someone who's only seen the first season, Nandor seems to care
it's a running thing throughout the series.
Nandor, he feels bad that he hurt Guillermo's feelings, so he tries to make it up to him. He even calls him his friend, which he immediately takes back. Like, ugh, no, that doesn't sound right. Forget I said that.
Yeah. It gets more complex and strange, and let's just say complex. The idea of Guillermo, or as Laszlo eventually ends up calling him, Gizmo. Laszlo cannot pronounce Guillermo, so he just calls him Gizmo. The idea, though, of Guillermo and his place in the house and his place in the world is eventually kind of the main crux of the series, to the point where you kind of feel like, screw the world as long as Guillermo is okay.
And like I said, Guillermo anyone who's been in a position like Guillermo's in real life can identify with that, because you get a job and you're said if you work hard and go above and beyond, you'll get that promotion, and you never do, because it's just a bait and switch. They're dangling that carrot in front of you, and then they'll take it away. And that's kind of where Guillermo is. He wants to be a vampire. He's been promised this, and it gets dangled in his face over and over again, and finally, and it keeps getting taken away.
The fascinating thing about this series is that vampires, as the modern literary concept of vampires, were originally a sort of commentary on the aristocracy and the wealthy in general, and how they bled dry the lower classes and the working man. Now, especially in the American context, we don't have a traditional aristocracy in the European sense. But what we do have is the kind of CEO boss class. And that is exactly the sort of drain that is done today, and you are correct to pick up on it, and why Guillermo resonates with people, because that is exactly how the vampire story is resonant today. Is it's not so much kind of the landed aristocratic, gentry kind of taking the farmland and bleeding dry the peasantry, so much as kind of just the one douchey boss that keeps going like, work really hard and you'll get that promotion, work really hard and you'll be one of us someday. If you work really hard, you can one day be the vampire that has a familiar working for you. And instead, what does Guillermo get? Well, he doesn't get that. He just gets to work harder for a larger number of vampires.
And see his promotion given to somebody else.
Well, that was originally supposed to be the idea, is that we've got this side story of the little LARPer girl, Jenna, who was played by Beanie Feldstein, and the idea was supposed to be that she was supposed to be a recurring character for longer, and then she went off and got kind of a little bigger career. She got some other parts that she wanted to go and do instead.
Just finished her run on Broadway in Funny Girl.
Well, yeah, I mean that's
a whole nother thing. Yeah.
That's been the more recent thing was what I was going to say, but she had gotten like a movie part, I think, just then, and she wanted to go pursue that rather than this kind of secondary part on this show, like it was originally. She wasn't going to be like a main character. She had decided that the film roles that she had gotten were where she wanted to put her energy. But the idea was that Jenna was going to be the counterpoint to Guillermo, the person who just kind of wandered in and got everything he wanted and had worked hard for just by accidentally being in the right place at the right time, because she was this LARPer. You know, Guillermo is told to go out and find virgin blood as a sacrifice
for the Baron,
and for the Baron, this VIP that's coming into town. And he goes out and he finds a couple of LARPers in the park, and he finds two of them that he's talking to and questions them, finds out that two of them are virgins. And one of them is immediately eaten. And then Jenna is transformed by Nadja because Nadja takes pity on her because she is being bullied. Nadja does not take kindly to that. And even though Nadja is one of Guillermo's biggest bullies in the series, especially at the start, she has more empathy for Jenna as a woman than she does for Guillermo as a man. So she decides to give Jenna the power to hurt the men who have been bullying her.
And she's kind of screws it up because it's completely sucks at being a vampire.
Yeah, and she just instead of understanding the power she has, she kind of just goes a little overboard with it. And we never really get the resolution to her story because of what happened behind the scenes with the actor, but
I mean, she can turn invisible. She's probably still there.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's lurking around out there somewhere, and maybe if the actor ever wants to come back, we can get the rest of the story before the end of the series. But, you know, she has the problem with when she transforms into a bat, it's never quite fully into a bat, so she's just this hideous kind of half and half creature, and you know, but she does have the really awesome power of turning invisible, which could be great if she ever learns how to use it properly,
which plays into her character because everyone already sees her as invisible. You know, no one pays attention to her. She's already invisible.
Yeah, she really just is there plot wise as a counterpoint to Guillermo, who it has worked so hard and long for this promotion, as you say, just to see it being tossed away on somebody who is bad at it, you know, hasn't put in the time, hasn't put in the study, hasn't, you know,
going back to Guillermo for just a moment. At the end of the first season, he finds out that he is a descendant of Van Helsing.
Yeah, which you might have figured out a little bit from the fact that his name is Guillermo de la Cruz. Maybe if Nandor spoke a little Spanish, might have had a little bit of a hint that maybe you don't want to familiar with that kind of religious last name, you know?
Yeah. So that also brings up some conflict within him. He wants to be a vampire. He still wants to be a vampire, but he is descendant from vampire hunters. And he has shown that he does kill vampires, although he's killed, as far as the first season is concerned, he's only killed vampires accidentally.
Yeah.
And a few screw-ups here and there that would have killed vampires in other circumstances. It's like, but at the end of the season where he has these wooden stakes that he's throwing them away, and they ram right into the portraits of the other three vampires, like, oh, I did a bad thing.
Oopsie. Glad no one was here to see that. Yeah, while, I mean, cover your ears if you don't want minor spoilers, but his genealogy does eventually become known to the vampires, and his skills do become known to them, and they take him on as more of a bodyguard / familiar because of some things that happen. The good part of that, the one thing I will say is that it does give him some confidence in a later sense that he is competent, that it's not an accident, that he is a competent person. And so there is a little bit of character growth there in the sense of, I do have something within me. And I think that's why a lot of people have fallen so in love with the character, because let's face it, from a representation standpoint, it is not every day that you get to see a Latino man with his particular body type get to be that kind of competent, self-possessed action hero, let's say. But, in later seasons, Guillermo gets to do some stunts. And they let Harvey get to do some stunts. I mean, there's some behind the scenes footage of, him getting to do those scenes, and practicing with weapons and things like that. So it's really cool to see that that's kind of open. And this is where it starts, is from the like, wait a minute, is that what's in my heritage? I like that it's not forgotten about and eventually becomes a major part of his personality. Is that, no, wait, I can actually own this. It's not a bad part of me. It's actually a good part of me, and I can respect vampires and love vampires and, use it as a positive.
I guess we can move on from that, because I want to talk about our love story this season. Our recurring love story of Nadja and Gregor.
Yeah.
So Gregor was a lover of Nadja's many, many years ago, that died mysteriously while being beheaded, but he constantly gets reincarnated and gets back together with Nadja, only to die again and again and again. And in the modern day, she has found him, now going by Jeff. And they go out on a few dates, but she finds him kind of boring. He's not Gregor. So she unlocks his memories of his past life, kind of turns him insane. I mean, imagine you today, and then every memory of every life you've ever lived rushing into your brain all at once. That can't be healthy.
Well.
But I do love how this whole thing wraps up by the time we get to the end of the season, is that while she does love Laszlo. She also loves Gregor. And she kind of sings this song about Gregor, how she wants to be with Gregor, and it somehow summons him to break out of the asylum, go to her, and profess his love to her all over again. And then we find out that it's been Laszlo. Laszlo knows who Gregor is and has always known who Gregor is. The face may change, but the scent stays the same. And every time Gregor gets anywhere near Nadja, he ends permanently until the next life. And I like that reveal at the end. It's like, stay away from my wife. I told you to stay away from my wife, and I'm going to make sure you stay away from my wife. But I mean, even at the end, Nadja even says, hey, let him have one life, one complete life before. Don't kill him this time. He'll just stay away from him. Thing. It's, again, the fact that Laszlo listens to Nadja and spares Gregor, Jeff, only for Jeff to run into a metal wire and decapitate himself.
It was meant to be.
I mean, unfortunately, that seems to be his fate in every life, is to die by beheading while trying to pursue Nadja. It's not the greatest existence, but sometimes our fates are sealed. Laszlo himself, we find that he has other interests, including botany. He creates topiary sculptures of the how am I saying this on a PG podcast? The female area of the various women that he has loved, including Nadja, including Nancy Reagan. But most importantly,
she was known for some things.
She was known for some things, so sure. And his mother.
But interestingly, this is also how we find out that he was Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Because several of the bits are bits of ladies of the evening that he knew in Whitechapel in a particular time of note. Yeah, no, it's that is one of the big reveals of the series, is that Laszlo was in fact Jack the Ripper.
And which brings us to the rivalry with the werewolf clan. So as one of his topiaries, particularly the topiary of his mother's private area, thinks of werewolf urine, as a clan of werewolves has been using his topiaries as bathrooms because part dog.
Yeah. And this, for the people who haven't seen the movie, this is a carryover from the movie, because the movie has quite a large portion of it is about the particular rivalry between the vampires in the film and the local werewolf group in Wellington. This particular storyline is a nod to the plot of the original film. They're just bringing back, well, what about the werewolves?
I love that Nandor plays on the fact that they are part dog by defeating them by throwing a chew toy off a building.
Yeah. We're going to have one-on-one combat. The werewolf chooses to use fangs and claws as his weapon. Nandor chooses a doggy bone.
And as soon as he pulls it out, all of the other werewolves are like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Resist, but resist.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have used a dog whistle. That would have been cold-blooded, though.
Well, I mean, but what's that going to do? It's just, unless he flew off the roof and then used the dog whistle to call. I mean, that it would have been a similar joke, but he would have, the thing is, though, is that it takes a little longer for the joke to land when you have the, like, what's he going to do with the dog bone? And then you see him throw it and you're like, oh, because it just goes over the roof. And then the werewolf goes flying off the roof trying to get it. And they're like, no! We see werewolves again later in the series. It's a few things in the series are kind of just gone. So I think kind of the only thing that's completely disappeared from the series at this point is kind of the Jenna storyline, and that's just because
she's unavailable.
Yeah, the actor is unavailable. But kind of everything that they've ever mentioned before. You mentioned the cursed witch's hat already that Laszlo has. That thing is still an ongoing plot point as of season 4. And not just like an in the background that they mention it, but like a massive plot point that is getting episodes dedicated to it still in season 4.
Now that you brought it up, let's talk about this little plot point here, at least as far as season 1 is concerned.
Yeah.
So the Baron, we'll get to the whole Baron thing in a moment, but I want to get this one moment here.
Yeah.
The Baron is disappointed that our clan, that vampires has not ruled the world yet. He is very old school, and he wants Nandor and his team to start taking over the world. We got to rule. So they decide, since they are technically the Staten Island vampires, that they will need to form an alliance with the other vampires in the other New York neighborhoods, starting with Manhattan, where another vampire owns a nightclub, and they try to negotiate some sort of agreement because, hey, the Baron wants us to team up.
Yeah, Simon the Devious.
Yes, Simon the Devious is a whole intro where he
played by Nick Kroll. Yeah.
So his entrance where he shoots the arrow on fire and then catches it before it hits somebody. It's a great entrance. So he decides, they all go to dress up, and since they really haven't gone out in about 100 years, they go by the last time they went to the club, which requires capes and proper old school vampire attire, which they're properly kind of ridiculed for. But anyway,
because no one wears capes anymore. Are you kidding? Yeah.
So he decides to dress, Laszlo decides to dress in his finest attire, including this hat made of witch's skin, which he got off a witch hunter that he killed, whose last words were, "The hat is cool." Yeah, the hat is cool, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, the hat is cursed. This is how one of their familiars dies. He starts falling through the floor. Bad things starts to happen whenever someone is wearing the hat. It seems to be that as long as you're not wearing the hat, the curse isn't effective. But when someone actually has the hat on their head, bad things start to happen. Like Laszlo's cape gets caught in the taxi door. They're caught in traffic trying to get there and such and such and such and such. Before they finally get the meeting and start to discuss their terms of this alliance. To which Simon says, I will form this alliance with you in the name of the Baron. You have to give me your hat. Apparently, they all came from the old country together on the boat, and Simon was always jealous that Laszlo was always wearing that hat, and he wants the hat. This gaudy hat. But Simon wants it. So Laszlo agrees, and it's because they need this alliance, they need to impress the Baron. And then Simon just kicks him out. All I wanted was the hat. I don't care about ruling the world. I don't care about the Baron. I don't care about you. get you and your ugly capes out of my club. And since the hat is cursed, he tries to do the fire arrow again and burns his club down.
Yeah. At which point Laszlo finally admits that the hat may be cursed.
And of course, as the subplot of that episode being Guillermo meeting the other familiars and kind of seeing how bad they're treated. The first instance that we're hearing of a familiars union.
Yeah, and their most recent win in the union being that they have been allowed to have a bucket in the familiar room
to go to the bathroom in.
Yeah.
The fact that one of the vampires has a cat as their familiar, that actually made me smile. It's like, oh, okay, but that's a witch's familiar, not a vampire's familiar.
Yeah. The thing is that the cursed hat is such a good plot device because it just keeps coming up over and over and over again, including at the end of the episode when Laszlo gets it back because they find Simon lying in the hospital, and Laszlo goes, "Oh, my hat!" and Guillermo is lying there too after an accident where Nandor dropped him while they were flying. Every time Laszlo puts the hat on, Guillermo flatlines. So eventually he's like, well, I'll just leave the hat off for now.
Even Colin kind of gets a bit of a subplot with another emotional vampire named Evie.
Yeah, played by Vanessa Bayer.
From SNL, yeah.
Yeah.
And her powers are a little bit more advanced than Colin's in that she's an emotional vampire who feeds off pity and sorrow and sadness because she has all of these sad stories about parents and grandparents and children and pets dying that it just makes everyone around her sad, and she feeds off that energy.
Yeah, Colin's main power is that he bores people.
Or annoys them.
Yeah, or sometimes he will annoy them, but it's more common for him to just bore people.
One of the things that I like that he does is that he bangs on Nandor's coffin in the morning, just to annoy him, saying, "Well, that's my morning coffee."
Yeah,
because it's explained in the first episode that energy vampires are the only kind of vampires that can take energy from other vampires.
Yeah, and that's why he lives with the vampires, really, is that he can he can feed off of them as well.
After they feed off a human, he can feed off them.
Yeah. The little subplot with Evie is kind of fascinating because not only do they team up for a while and
they start dating.
They start dating and they feed off of each other. I mean, they feed off of other people together. But eventually, Evie starts feeding off of Colin. She starts feeding off of his emotions for her. And Colin has to break up with her.
And she plays that up too. She's like, "Colin, please don't leave me. I love you." Oh, I'm just kidding. I would just need one more piece out of you.
Yeah.
So like, she never really cared about him. She was just using him. But Vanessa Bayer plays it really well.
It's a really good thing because when I was first watching the show, I didn't really believe the energy vampire joke. Like, I really just thought it was a joke. Like, oh, they're making a joke about the energy vampire thing. Like, there's just this really boring guy who lives with the vampires, and he survives being fed off of. Like, he avoids being fed off of, and he gets free rent by convincing them he's a different type of vampire. But he's not really a vampire. Like, this guy is a con artist, basically. And I thought it was kind of funny because I'm like, this is a really good scam he's got going. Because he doesn't have to be a familiar like Guillermo. And he's not Dinner. But he gets to just live in their house. So yeah, so I didn't buy that the energy vampire thing was real until this episode. When we actually see him using like actual powers.
His eyes glow, he starts to float.
Yeah, I mean there were little bits where like his eyes glowed in previous episodes and stuff, but like this one, like he's actually like floating, and you know he is battling with her, and they're in a restaurant talking about we're eating right now, you know. So I was like, oh, they want this to be a supernatural creature. Okay.
I just love that battle between them as she keeps on saying the saddest story there is, and he's counteracting with boring facts. And it's like she somehow turns that boring fact into a sad sob story.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of fascinating because, like I said, I thought that it was funny, but I also thought it was going to be revealed that Colin Robinson was just a normal human being that was just scamming the vampires, and that maybe even Guillermo knew, but he wasn't going to rat the guy out. Like, yeah, totally, energy vampire, it's a thing, and like maybe just Colin would, you know, slip him $100 every now and then to just keep up the ruse. I was kind of surprised when I was like, okay, they're really going, this is an actual supernatural creature. It's kind of fascinating how over the years they've taken the lore of the energy vampire. Because it gets really complex. But it is an interesting idea in the series, and one that I think is the most fascinating idea that they've brought into it.
I think it's now is a good time to talk about the main, I don't know if we'd call him an antagonist or what, but the Baron himself. Baron Athanas, played amazingly by Doug Jones. We're talking about Doug Jones again.
Yeah, it's always a good day when you get to talk about Doug Jones.
Just talked about him when in The Shape of Water. By the time this episode comes out, Hocus Pocus 2 will already be out when he's in that. So yeah, Doug Jones just likes playing characters that wear lots of makeup.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you can say like necessarily so much as it pays the bills.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not comfortable, but it pays the bills.
So as I mentioned, the Baron is an old school vampire who believes that vampires are superior and should rule the world. He has that very Nosferatu appearance, more bat than human, as it were. And he has no male genitalia to speak of, but somehow has had a long romantic affair with both Nadja and Laszlo.
Yeah. It is said repeatedly over the course of the series that the Baron can absolutely get it.
And as he says later, you know, the Baron name was a joke because Barren, because he has no genitalia. Because he's always wanted children, he cannot sire children.
Yeah, but you know.
Yeah. So I mean, and he is the driving force through a lot of the stories in the series. Like I mentioned, he is the one that says that they need to form alliances to take over the New York area, to take over the world. He eventually decides that he wants to see the world. He wants to see this this
New World
Island, the new world. Yeah, he wants to see what the new world is like.
This is his first time in the Americas, and he wants to see what it's all about.
Yeah, they go on a night. The Laszlo and Naja and Nandor and the Baron all go out on a night on the town, and they
do shots.
They do literally. They take a guy, a drain with blood, and do shots. Yeah. But they are trying to keep their identities as vampires low key. Meanwhile, the Baron going, "I am a vampire. You will fear me." And as Nadia said, there's only so many times you can say he's just joking before people start getting suspicious. But the point is, he doesn't want to hide his identity. He wants to be out and about, proud of being a vampire. But again, which fair to him, but that's not really going to get him very far. There's funny moments where he ends up drinking a drunk guy's blood, therefore he gets drunk. They all end up at a club and they drink blood of people that have taken drugs, so they have drug blood in them. They all have the effects of being on drugs. The Baron, who wants to taste human food, pizza pie, as he says. It's said that vampires cannot consume human food, but he wants to anyway. And the pizza has garlic in it, projectile vomits all over the place, and that scene is hilarious.
Yeah. The one that is really interesting is that they keep running into Sean, the next door neighbor.
Yeah, Sean is not a nice guy. He's very male chauvinistic. The first time we see him is he talks very negatively about his wife, and Laszlo hates him because of that, because he doesn't treat his wife right. Your wife should kill you, strangle you with your own sphincter.
Well, yeah, we eventually meet his wife, who is played by Marissa Jarrett Winokur, and she's very interesting, and you realize that she gives as good as she gets. And Sean is annoying, but he's not that awful. He and eventually Laszlo calls Sean his best friend, and the relationship grows. He is in the first season kind of very annoying, but he's just kind of he's he's New York guy,
Yeah.
he's the guy who lives next door and is very New York, He keeps running into the Baron and the vampires in general as they do various things, and constantly gets his memory erased.
Because the Baron's trying to eat him.
Well, no, I mean, just throughout the series, it's kind of a running gag of how often this poor guy gets his memory erased.
That's got to cause some level of brain damage.
Yeah, I mean, it does. We do see over the course of the series that memory erasure thing will very quickly turn a human mind to Swiss cheese if you do it too much. The interesting thing is that both the Baron and the group of vampires from the house kind of both admit that they had considered killing each other before their night out, but they end the night kind of good friends. They want to continue in their quest to take over the world. Unfortunately, by the point of their night out, the vampires have only been able to take over about 5 houses in Staten Island.
2 blocks. They've taken over 2 blocks of Staten Island.
Yeah,
throughout the course of the first season.
Yeah, their plans are not very good, because as these things go in a series, created by Jermaine and Taika, they're not terribly competent at what they're attempting to do. And to be honest, neither is the Baron. As you learn the backstories of each of the characters, you realize that no, they were always like this. When you hear Nandor's stories about his conquests, you realize, like, oh, yeah, no, you were always a screw up, you know? When you hear Laszlo tell stories about, his village, or when you hear Nadja tell stories about her life previous, you're like, oh, yeah, even as humans, you were like this.
You're just idiots.
Yeah. It's like you were always kind of useless, all of you. It is kind of like that when you hear the Baron talk about his life a little bit too. There are a few things the Baron says about his previous existence in the few times that we see him that you're like, oh, yeah, you weren't really good at much, except for the fact that the Baron can totally get it. Like that's kind of the one place where he excels. He comes to them and he's like, why haven't you taken over the world yet? And the way that the vampires treat him is kind of like, oh no, it's the Baron. But once he gets there and once you actually find out a little more about him, you're like, oh, he is also a screw up. Just like everybody else in this world, this is yet another bisexual screw up. Well, welcome to Taika Waititi's world where everyone is a bisexual screw up. It's not like, why haven't you taken over the world? I would have done that had I been here. No, he wouldn't have done it either. He's just a blowhard that wandered in being like, why haven't you done the thing? I would have done the thing. No, you wouldn't have. You would have also screwed it up because you're exactly that same type of dude.
So after their night out and they're still under the effects of the drug blood that they drank.
We drank some humans. They were on drugs.
Therefore, we are on drugs. So they end up partying all night. Sun's coming up. They need to get home. And it looks like it's going to be a good night. Everyone goes to their coffin. Everyone's fine.
Or they're about to.
They're about to. And then earlier in the episode, Nandor tells Guillermo to get roses to pretty up the house for the Baron. He finally arrives with the roses, opening the door and killing the Baron with sunlight.
Well, he thought they would all be in their coffins by that point. Everybody's usually in bed. The sun's coming up. Don't you know where you're supposed to be? He didn't know they were all going to be blitzed out of their minds just standing around chatting.
The one time he leaves them alone.
Yeah.
But because of the Baron's rank within the vampire world, he's a screw-up, but he's still a high-ranking screw-up. The Vampire Council puts them on trial for the murder of the Baron. And this is cameo. We talked about the Deadpool cameos the movie. This is cameos the episode.
This is the point where you're like, you called everyone in your phone book, didn't you?
The funny thing about this episode is that they have the Vampire Council. And the Vampire Council is made up of actors who have played vampires in other things. We actually get Taika, Jermaine, and Jonathan Bruh reprising their roles from the movie. But we also get Tilda Swinton, Wesley Snipes, Danny Trejo, Evan Rachel Wood, and Paul Rubens. Essentially reprising their characters from whatever vampire movies they were in.
Yeah.
Shouts out to other actors who have played vampires, including Kiefer Sutherland, who apparently was actually offered a role in this episode but turned it down.
And Tom and Brad, who just couldn't make it. And I mean, it's so many jokes,
My favorite gag is, Wesley Snipes, who is Skyping in, probably because of his legal issues. But none of the Vampire Council like him because he's a half vampire and a vampire killer. So it's like he's just playing Blade.
Yeah, it was, and the thing is, they didn't have the rights to the names for any of the characters they played, so they're just all using their real first names.
So it's Paul Reubens is Paul, Tilda Swinton is Tilda, Wesley Snipes is Wesley, Evan Rachel Wood is Evan, and Danny Trejo is Danny. But they are acting like and similarly looking to their respective vampire characters.
Yeah, the funny thing is that this super duper annoys me on a personal level as somebody who both loves the movie that's getting shouted out and the one actor that hasn't gotten the credit here. Tilda Swinton is the leader of the Vampire Council as a shout out to Only Lovers Left Alive. Just recently in season 4, there's a joke where Jim Jarmusch shows up in a vampire club as a joke in the series, which is also a shout out because he was the director of Only Lovers Left Alive. So I've just got to ask, why the absolute hell has Tom Hiddleston not made a cameo in this show yet? As the other person in Only Lovers Left Alive. Why have we just not gotten our vampire cameo yet from this? If we've gotten Tilda and we've gotten Jim to make cameos on this show, come on, man. But yeah, because she is wearing her same freaking wig from the film and every,
so is Paul Reubens.
So is Paul Reubens, to be honest. They just made him look like his Buffy the Vampire Slayer character.
Wesley Snipes is even wearing the shades.
The thing is that everybody is kind of just, being awesome. And
although if you told me that any of these actors were actually vampires, I'd probably believe you, because despite being, years and years away from their first go around, Paul Reubens and Danny Trejo hasn't really aged that much since.
Yeah. Well, Tilda Swinton has already admitted that she's just from the same planet as David Bowie, so she gets a pass on whatever. The funny thing is that this starts a long line of jokes of just
referencing their movies.
People who have played vampires and other things showing up and being, hilarious. We also in this same episode just get Dave Bautista for no real reason, just hanging out.
It goes into the running gag of the episode. Apparently, Laszlo is already unfavored by the Vampire Council because he turned a baby into a vampire.
And Dave Bautista has his character has caught the flack for that.
Yeah, so he's
been imprisoned for that crime for 100 years or something by that point.
It kind of, so at the beginning of the episode when we get that fact, he says, it's that kid must be 90, that baby must be 90 years old by now. Then we find out that Bautista's been in jail by the Vampire Council for 90 years. And the cap off is we find out that another member of the Vampire Council is this baby.
The other kind of big person that we get in here that is not necessarily a vampire joke is we get Kristen Schaal in here as the guide, who is basically like a main character by the later seasons. Like, she might as well just be in the main credits by season 4. She's in basically every episode. So this is her first appearance when she shows up and is like, "You've been summoned by the Vampire Council." I had forgotten she had appeared this early in the series, to be honest, because I'm just so used to seeing her now. I was like, oh, she obviously showed up later on. Like, no, she's first season. But the guide has such a great character arc as well. Yeah, the idea of this whole interesting vampire council of just these really cool people from all these other things, which kind of just suggests that within this world, all other vampire media both exists and is accurate.
They're documentaries.
Yeah, that they're all just documentaries. Except for, or maybe also, Interview with a Vampire?
Well, they mentioned Brad and Tom.
Yeah, they mentioned Brad and Tom as being potential members of the Vampire Council, but they also mentioned Antonio Banderas as an actor and Interview with the Vampire as a movie. So I'm not entirely sure how this works, but it is a funny thing to try to make gel in your brain. The scene of all of the Vampire Council trying to figure out what to do with our main vampires is hilarious, because they're like, "Were you going to kill the Baron?" They're like, "Well, we talked about it, but then we decided not to do it." They're like, "Well, how did he die?" They're like, "Don't talk. Nobody saw us do it." And then the Baron's familiar comes in. They're like, "Oh, good. She never talks." And then she just starts giving this long speech. And they're like, "Wait, she can talk? We've never heard her speak." Because it just shows how little they pay attention to familiars, because they've never spoken to her or heard her speak until that point.
And it goes hand in hand with how familiars are treated, at least in this first season. This is we see the familiars of the other members of the council. One of them, like we mentioned, was the 70-year-old man.
Yeah,
I'm wondering who the 70-year-old man is the familiar of.
Probably I mean, it's interesting because he would have to be a familiar of somebody on the Vampire Council.
Yeah.
So it's just you wonder who. The thing is, though, is that eventually they bring Guillermo in to testify, and Guillermo tells the truth. It was him that killed the Baron. It was an accident. It's the truth. He accidentally opened the door and killed the Baron.
And nobody believes him because he's just a familiar.
Yeah, you can't kill, Baron FNS the Undying because you're just a familiar. And the problem is that everybody's like, well, you know what? We don't really feel like killing other vampires, and there is a familiar here, and he looks kind of tasty. Everybody just want to have a snack, and we can just call it quits. I mean, nobody really wants to kill another vampire, right?
And none of them really like the Baron anyway.
Yeah, nobody liked the Baron anyway. He was kind of weird and gross, and let's just say that the familiar did it, even though nobody really believes the familiar did. We'll just have a snack, and And the interesting thing is that Nadja and Laszlo are like, yeah, eat the familiar, but it's Nandor who can't go along with that, and so Nandor takes the blame and says, hey, the three of us, we killed him. Yeah, totally. We pushed him into the sunlight, roasted him alive. Yep, there we go.
But, and it just shows that Nandor does have some feelings for Guillermo.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't want to use the word friend. He definitely cares for him in some capacity. That he's willing to die, to get roasted alive in the sun, just like in Interview with the Vampire, for Guillermo to live.
And that's what they decided. They were like, well, you admitted to it. We were going to let you go, But, oh well. The interesting thing, the thing we haven't mentioned is that Colin Robinson is on the Vampire Council.
Yeah. And he does nothing.
He does nothing. He says nothing. He's like, no, I'm just going to go along with the group. Seems easiest, whatever.
Like, Colin, help us. What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Even if he voted against killing them, it's still one vote versus everyone else saying yes.
Yeah. Because everybody voted against him, including the baby. They're all going to be shoved out in the sun, except Guillermo, who's gonna, somebody's gonna eat him, I think. The thing is that they're, the vampires try to escape, but they're all rather incompetent.
They try to grab weapons off the wall, but they're bolted to the wall.
Yeah, they're just there for show. But the thing is that Guillermo's accidental superpower, that he doesn't yet know why at this point in the season, is he accidentally ends up killing his captors.
Yeah, he carries. We find out that he has a crucifix that he wears around his neck. I believe this is the first time. This is for them I've seen it in the episodes that I've seen. Maybe I didn't notice it. But he pulls out this crucifix, which scares the vampire, and he backs into one of the weapons on the wall, killing him.
Well, he's Mexican, and he was raised a good little Catholic boy, and probably his grandma gave it to him or something.
Probably.
But
plus he works for a vampire, and I guess that's kind of insurance.
Yeah, maybe he keeps it around for that. We don't know. But he accidentally ends up killing his two captors and escaping. And as the sun is coming up and going to kill the vampires, it turns out that Colin Robinson and Guillermo show up with a big umbrella and shield them from the sun in the well they're trapped in.
And I love the fact that Colin takes the opportunity to get a little bit of energy from the three.
he tells them a story about how he's going to return the umbrella after he's done using it. The return policies for the hardware store and stuff like that. But I love the little after credit sequence where you find out that they've just left the camera crew trapped in the well. There are times throughout the series where we do see various things that happen to the people filming the series, and it's never
the Baron instantly seeing the camera
eats one of the sound people.
So the sound keeps cutting out for the rest of the episode.
Yeah. There is one episode in a later season where the camera crew follows Guillermo into a house that Guillermo doesn't realize is filled with a vampire family. And they just wander into the house unaware, Guillermo and some other humans, and there's an entire just family of vampires, and Guillermo ends up being fine because Guillermo, and the camera crew not so much. So there are moments like that throughout the series at various points where you are reminded that the camera crew are actual people, and it's not like it's not a third person omniscient view. There are actual real humans following them around as a documentary crew, because you are occasionally when you're watching a TV show, you do mentally, blank out the camera crew, because for most series, the camera crew isn't real. It's just your viewpoint into the series. And this series has a really good way of reminding you, this is a documentary crew. They are real people, within the context of the series, that are following these people around. And you do occasionally get points where you see the camera and sound people that are following around, and sometimes they have a very grisly fate just in the course of doing their job. And sometimes they might survive, but they might get a funny reaction to the camera, of the, like, is this really my job? Why am I doing this? They do not pay me enough. There are so many, that's kind of the main plot of the season, is the whole thing with the Baron, which gets set up. And, there's still stuff about the fallout of having met the Baron in season 1 that is still coming up in, the most recent season, which, as of recording this, is season 4. There is supposed to be a season 5, so can't wait. There are so many little things that are like running jokes, like Laszlo screaming bat every time he turns into bat form. Which is one of those things that is a character trait for him that was just Matt Berry being weird on set. The first time that they were like, okay, you're gonna turn into a bat, so just, run off camera or whatever and we'll add the effect. He was like, all right, my darling, let us turn into bats. And he ran off, and as he ran off camera, he screamed, bat! And everybody thought it was so funny that they ended up just leaving it in the episode. And now every time Laszlo turns into a bat, he screams bat.
And that actually became part of Jenna's story.
Yeah, her trying to turn into a bat. But it was never intended for Laszlo to scream bat every time. It happened one time on set, and then everybody found it too funny, so he did that. There are all kinds of little touches that, Nadja's absolute hatred of witches, which I don't really think came up. There are jokes about Nandor keeps talking about witches stealing his semen, which becomes such an absolute overbearing running gag throughout the series, of both Nadja's hatred of witches and Nandor being obsessed with witches are going to come steal his semen. And eventually, there's whole episodes about it. Some of these things that are just, you think, are like, why have they repeated this joke more than once? And then next season it becomes like why is there a whole episode about this thing that I thought was just a passing joke? And sometimes it was, they were planting a specific, plot point, and sometimes it was just somebody said something on set that they found too funny. Kevin Novak is a really good impressionist. There is one episode in one season where he does impressions of all the other cast members as part of a thing that happens, and that becomes just a hilarious thing. It becomes like like Nandor trying to pick up a woman, and he starts trying to do it as Laszlo because it's like the most successful man he knows with women. So then it becomes like Nandor as Laszlo with like
So let's ask the question, Kiki, does What We Do in the Shadows have the magic?
I mean, I think it's obvious that I think so. These early episodes are not even beginning to scratch the surface of the magic that this show has. It gets so deep and complex, and eventually it's like, why am I laughing while crying and wanting to hug a teddy bear? And, yeah.
Honestly, as a first-time viewer, I'm going to say it does. I liked it. When I have some spare time, I'll go through the rest of the series. I'm really interested in where this thing goes, and yeah, I think I'm Team Guillermo at this point. I want to see where this goes. So let's move on to next week, as we finally are discussing about a Halloween tradition. Because there's one thing that we all look forward to every Halloween, no matter how cynical we feel, no matter how much we feel that it's past its prime. We can always look forward to the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes.
Yay!
Regardless of how you feel about the state of current Simpsons, you can always guarantee that the Treehouse of Horror episode is going to be one that you need to watch. And so come back next week as we go through the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes, and we will talk to you all next time.
Bye! If you want to help the fight for human rights in the U.S., the American Civil Liberties Union works to protect constitutional rights for all Americans. Their website is aclu.org. If you need reproductive services in the U.S. or wish to donate to those who do, go to abortionfunds.org for more info. The battle isn't over until the last person surrenders. The fight continues. Don't let the magic stop here.
Join our conversation online on Facebook at Rewatching the Magic,
Twitter at Rewatch the Magic,
and of course, new episodes every week at rewatchingthemagic.podbean.com.
Remember, the magic is for everyone.
It only stops if you let it.